It started with a nagging feeling, the kind that creeps into your mind late at night when the house is quiet, and the only sound is the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Something was wrong with James. My husband of 8 years, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, was changing in ways I couldn't explain. He was always distracted, his phone glued to his hand like it was an extension of his body. He had started coming home later and later, always with a plausible excuse that somehow never quite satisfied me. First, I told myself it was stress. James had been working long hours at the firm, and I knew his job demanded a lot from him. But the more I tried to rationalize his behavior, the harder it became to ignore the distance growing between us. He was evasive, guarded, and every time I asked him what was wrong, he would flash that charming smile, the one that had made me fall in love with him, and dismiss my concerns. "You're overthinking again, Lily," he'd say, laughing softly as he brushed my hair behind my ear. "You know I love you." But love didn't feel like this. It didn't feel like being shut out of his life, like being a stranger in my own marriage. The first real crack in the facade came on a Friday night. James had gone out with some of his colleagues, or so he claimed, and I decided to surprise him by stopping by the bar where he said they'd be. I even baked cookies for him and his coworkers, trying to be the supportive wife I had always prided myself on being. But when I arrived, James wasn't there. I checked the parking lot for his car, convinced I had misunderstood the name of the bar, but deep down I knew I hadn't. My stomach churned as I drove home, the cookies sitting untouched on the passenger seat. The next morning I confronted him. He looked genuinely surprised when I mentioned the bar, but his response only deepened my suspicions. "I'm sorry, babe. We ended up changing plans last minute and went to a different place," he explained too casually. "I didn't think to text you because it was such a small thing." It wasn't a small thing. Not to me. From that moment on, I started paying closer attention. I noticed the way he would angle his phone away from me when a text came in, or how he'd suddenly lock it whenever I walked into the room. He'd become increasingly protective of his schedule, always vague about where he was going or who he was meeting. I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being paranoid or if there was something he wasn't telling me. And then there was his mother. Linda had always been overly involved in our lives, but I had chalked it up to her being protective of her only son. She was the type of woman who called every day, asking about James's meals, his work, and even his sleep schedule. At times, her meddling drove me crazy, but I respected her dedication to her family. After all, she had raised James alone after his father passed away, and I knew their bond was unshakable. But as I grew more suspicious of James, I began to notice things about Linda too. She would often deflect when I mentioned my concerns about his behavior, reassuring me with a sweet, practiced smile. "Oh, Lily, you know how men are," she'd say. "They get caught up in work, but he loves you. Don't you worry about a thing." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Instead, they left me feeling dismissed, like I was being treated as a child who didn't understand the complexities of adult relationships. The truth hit me like a freight train 2 months later. I was cleaning out the spare bedroom when I found an envelope tucked into one of James's old jackets. Inside were receipts, dinners at expensive restaurants, hotel bookings, and even a receipt for a necklace I had never seen. My hands trembled as I went through them, each piece of paper feeling like a dagger to my heart. I confronted him that evening, laying the receipts out on the kitchen counter like evidence in a trial. At first, he tried to deny it, but the weight of the proof was undeniable. Finally, he broke down and admitted to having an affair. Or rather, affairs. Plural. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something at him, but the worst was yet to come. It was Linda who sealed the betrayal. A few days after the confrontation, she showed up at our house unannounced. I thought she was coming to support me, to help me make sense of the wreckage of my marriage. But instead, she sat me down with a calm, almost clinical expression and said something I will never forget. "Lily, I know you're hurting, but you have to understand, James is just like his father." Her words didn't register at first. I stared at her, uncomprehending, as she continued. "This isn't the first time, and it probably won't be the last. Men like James, they have needs. I knew about the affairs, of course, but it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. You're his wife, his partner. That's what matters." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had known. All this time she had known and said nothing. Worse, she had enabled him, covering for his lies, helping him maintain the illusion of a faithful husband while I was left in the dark. The realization made me feel physically sick. How could you? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. How could you stand by and let him do this to me? Linda's expression didn't waver. Because it's what a good wife does, she said simply. Marriage is about compromise. You need to decide if you're strong enough to stand by him, or if you're going to throw away everything you've built together over some indiscretions. Indiscretions. That's what she called them. In that moment, I realized I had been betrayed not just by my husband, but by the very person who was supposed to be my ally. Linda's complicity cut deeper than James's lies ever could. She had been complicit in my humiliation, an active participant in the charade that had become my life. I left James a week later. The divorce was messy and painful, but it was worth every sleepless night and tear-filled day to reclaim my dignity. Linda tried to reach out to me several times, insisting that I was making a mistake, but I ignored her. There was no place for her or James in the life I was rebuilding. Looking back now, I wonder how I could have been so blind. But betrayal has a way of hiding in plain sight, wrapped in the guise of love and loyalty. Linda thought she was protecting her son, but in the end, all she did was destroy my trust in both of them. And James? I hear he's already remarried. I can only hope his new wife knows what she's getting into. The months after the divorce were a haze of pain and self-discovery. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away from the home James and I had shared. It was nothing fancy, a modest one-bedroom with creaky floors and outdated fixtures, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that was entirely my own, untouched by the lies and betrayals that had defined my marriage. The silence in my new apartment was deafening at first. Without James's voice filling the rooms or Linda's incessant calls interrupting my day, I was left alone with my thoughts. I cried often, deep gut-wrenching sobs that left me feeling hollow. But in those quiet, lonely moments, I began to piece myself back together. I forced myself to eat even when I had no appetite. I started going for long walks in the park, letting the crisp air clear my mind. Slowly, I found a rhythm, a routine that didn't revolve around anyone but myself. One of the hardest parts was explaining the divorce to friends and family. James and I had been the golden couple, the pair everyone thought would last forever. When people asked what happened, I gave them the simplest version of the truth. He wasn't who I thought he was. Most people nodded sympathetically, offering kind words or awkward pats on the shoulder, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes, the unspoken questions they were too polite to ask. Linda, of course, didn't make things any easier. She called me relentlessly in the weeks following the divorce, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between pleading and scolding. In one message, she begged me to reconsider, saying that James was lost without me. In another, she accused me of being selfish, of throwing away a perfectly good marriage over something every man does. I blocked her number eventually, but the damage had already been done. Her words echoed in my mind, feeding the small, insidious part of me that wondered if I had overreacted. But then I'd remember the receipts, the lies, the cold way James had admitted to his affairs like they were a minor inconvenience. And I'd remember Linda's words, her chilling pragmatism as she told me to look the other way. Those memories kept me grounded, reminding me why I had left and why I could never go back. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Linda. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding as I debated whether to read it at all. Curiosity won out, and I unfolded the neatly written note. It was short, only a few paragraphs, but the contents left me reeling. In the letter, Linda apologized, not for her role in James's betrayals, but for the way she had handled things. She admitted that she had known about James's affairs for years, even before we were married. "I thought I was protecting you," she wrote. "I didn't want you to get hurt, and I believed that as long as you didn't know, it wouldn't matter. But I see now that I was wrong. I hope you can forgive me someday." I crumpled the letter and threw it into the trash. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for, it was absolution, and I wasn't about to give it to her. Around that time I started therapy. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me felt like seeking help was an admission of weakness. But my therapist, a kind woman named Rachel, helped me see things differently. She explained that the betrayal I had experienced wasn't just about James's infidelity. It was about the systematic way he and Linda had manipulated me, making me doubt my instincts and ignore my own needs. "You were gaslit," Rachel said during one session. "It's no wonder you're struggling to trust yourself." Those words stuck with me. Gaslit. The term felt almost clinical, but it perfectly described what I had been through. James had made me question my reality, and Linda had reinforced those doubts, convincing me to accept a version of my life that wasn't real. It was a painful realization, but it also gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. As I worked through my pain, I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my career, taking on new projects and volunteering for assignments that challenged me. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, reminding me of the vibrant, independent woman I had been before James entered my life. And then there was Ethan. Ethan was a colleague I had known for years, but we had never been more than acquaintances. After the divorce, we started running into each other more often at work events, coffee shops, even the gym. He was kind and attentive, always asking how I was doing and genuinely listening to my answers. At first, I was hesitant to let him get too close. The wounds from my marriage were still raw, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to open my heart again. But Ethan was patient. He didn't push or pry. He simply made himself available, offering quiet support without expecting anything in return. Slowly, I began to trust him. We started spending more time together, going for walks, sharing meals, and talking about everything from our favorite books to our childhood dreams. For the first time in years, I felt seen, truly seen. Our relationship developed naturally, without the rush or pressure I had felt with James. Ethan wasn't perfect, he had his flaws just like anyone. But he was honest and steady in a way that made me feel safe. He didn't try to fix me or pretend my past didn't matter. Instead, he embraced all of me, scars and all. As our relationship deepened, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned from my marriage and its aftermath. I realized that love isn't about perfection or sacrifice. It's about partnership, about being with someone who values and respects you as an equal. With Ethan, I finally understood what that meant. Linda tried to reach out one last time, nearly a year after I had left James. She sent me a photo of him with his new wife, a beautiful woman who looked eerily similar to me. "He's moved on," Linda wrote in the accompanying note. "I hope you can too." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already moved on, not just from James, but from the version of myself that had tolerated his lies and Linda's interference. I was stronger now, wiser. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, piece by piece, and I was proud of the woman I had become. As time went on, my life began to feel like my own again. The wounds from my marriage didn't vanish overnight. There were still moments when a stray thought or memory would catch me off guard, reopening old scars. Sometimes it was the scent of James's cologne lingering on a stranger in the grocery store, or the sight of a couple holding hands, laughing together as if the world could never touch them. But those moments grew fewer and farther between, and when they came, they didn't cut as deep. Ethan and I continued to build something real, something steady and warm. He never pressured me to rush into anything, which I appreciated more than I could say. We spent our time doing simple things. Cooking dinner together, watching old movies, hiking on weekends. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was honest. And after years of living in the shadow of deception, honesty was all I wanted. One evening, as we sat on my couch sharing a bottle of wine, Ethan turned to me with a hesitant smile. "I know this might sound strange," he began, fiddling with the stem of his glass, "but have you thought about forgiving them? James and his mother, I mean." The question caught me off guard. Forgive them? The idea felt almost laughable. Why would I do that? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Ethan didn't flinch. "Not for them," he said gently. "For you." His words lingered in my mind long after he left that night. I couldn't imagine forgiving James or Linda, not after everything they had done. But Ethan's suggestion planted a seed of curiosity. What would forgiveness look like? Could it really help me let go of the anger I still carried? The bitterness that sometimes crept into my thoughts when I least expected it? I brought it up with Rachel during my next therapy session. Is forgiveness even possible? I asked her, frustration creeping into my voice. How do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what they did, she said. It's not about saying their actions were okay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. Her words echoed Ethan's, but hearing them from Rachel felt different. She had a way of breaking things down that made the impossible seem manageable. I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive James or Linda. Not yet, but for the first time I began to see forgiveness as something worth striving for. In the meantime, life kept moving. My career flourished as I took on more leadership roles at work, and I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't expected. I even started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. It began as journaling, a way to process my thoughts and emotions, but over time it grew into something more. I started drafting essays and short stories, pouring my experiences into words. Writing became a form of healing, a way to reclaim my voice after years of feeling silenced. One of my essays, a deeply personal piece about betrayal and resilience, caught the attention of a small online magazine. They published it, and the response was overwhelming. Readers reached out to share their own stories of heartbreak and recovery, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. My pain, as unique as it felt, was part of a larger tapestry of human experience. That realization brought a sense of comfort I hadn't expected. As my confidence grew, so did my willingness to confront the ghosts of my past. One day, almost 2 years after the divorce, I found myself reaching for the letter Linda had sent me. The one I had crumpled and thrown into the trash. I had saved it, for reasons I couldn't explain at the time, and now I unfolded it with trembling hands. Reading her words again, I felt a surge of anger, but it was different this time, less consuming, less sharp. I didn't feel the need to scream or cry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity for Linda. Her worldview was so warped, so rooted in enabling and justifying bad behavior, that she couldn't see the damage she had caused. She wasn't just complicit in James's actions. She was a product of a toxic cycle, one that had likely started long before I entered the picture. I didn't write her back, but I did write about her. I wrote an essay exploring the generational patterns of betrayal and complicity, using Linda as a case study without naming her directly. It was cathartic, and when the essay was published, it resonated with readers in ways I hadn't anticipated. People shared stories about their own Lindas, about mothers-in-law, fathers, or friends who had enabled the worst behaviors of those they loved. The connections I formed through that piece felt like a balm, a reminder that healing was possible. James, for his part, remained a distant memory. I heard through mutual friends that his second marriage was already on shaky ground. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad for the woman who had stepped into my old role. She deserved better, just as I had. By the time Ethan and I celebrated our 3rd anniversary, I had come to terms with the idea of forgiveness, not as an act of reconciliation but as a release. I didn't need James or Linda to apologize or understand the depth of their betrayal. I didn't need their validation or their regret. I just needed to let go of the hold they had on me. So one quiet afternoon, I wrote a letter to James. I didn't send it. It wasn't for him. It was for me. In the letter, I acknowledged the pain he had caused me and the ways he had broken my trust. But I also acknowledged my own strength, my resilience in the face of his lies. I forgive you, I wrote at the end, the words surprising even me. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. When I finished, I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't need to burn it or throw it away. Just writing it was enough. Looking back now, I see my marriage to James not as a failure, but as a turning point. It forced me to confront truths about myself and others that I might have otherwise ignored. It taught me the value of boundaries, the importance of self-respect, and the power of walking away from people who don't value you. And most importantly, it led me to the life I have now. A life filled with love, honesty, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing my worth. For that, I am grateful. As the years rolled by, the wounds left by my marriage faded into scars, faint reminders of the pain I had endured and overcome. Scars are funny things, they're permanent, but they don't hurt anymore. They're simply part of you, woven into your skin and your story. That's how I began to feel about James, Linda, and everything that had happened. It was a chapter of my life, not the whole book. Ethan and I eventually moved in together. It wasn't a decision we rushed. We had both been through our share of heartbreak, and neither of us wanted to jeopardize what we had built by moving too quickly. But when it happened, it felt right. He helped me pick out furniture for our shared space, and we painted the walls together, laughing as we splattered paint on each other like kids. The apartment wasn't much bigger than my old one, but it felt expansive in its warmth and simplicity. It was a home, not just a place to live but a sanctuary. We talked about marriage sometimes, but there was no pressure. For me, the idea of a wedding was still tangled up in memories of my first one. The promises made and broken, the illusion of forever that had crumbled so quickly. Ethan understood that. "We don't need a piece of paper to prove anything," he said one evening as we sat on the couch, his arm draped around my shoulders. "What matters is how we treat each other, every single day." He was right. And yet, as the months turned into years, I found myself imagining what it would be like to stand beside him and make those promises again. This time with a man who truly meant them. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming my right to believe in love and commitment, despite everything I had been through. During this time, my writing continued to grow. What had started as a therapeutic outlet had blossomed into a second career. I published a collection of essays, many of them inspired by my journey through betrayal, healing, and rediscovery. The book was modestly successful, and I received letters from readers around the world who saw pieces of themselves in my words. Their stories, in turn, inspired me to keep writing, to keep exploring the messy, beautiful complexity of human relationships. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a woman named Margaret, who was in her late 60s and had spent decades in a marriage much like mine. Her husband had cheated on her repeatedly, and like Linda, her mother-in-law had known and enabled his behavior. But unlike me, Margaret had stayed. "I thought leaving would mean I had failed," she wrote. "Now I realize staying was the real failure, for me at least. Reading your book gave me the courage to finally leave. Thank you." Her words brought me to tears. I thought about how many women like Margaret were out there, trapped in marriages that drained them, convinced they had no other choice. I thought about Linda too, and how her own choices had likely been shaped by similar beliefs. For the first time, I felt a flicker of compassion for her. Not enough to absolve her, but enough to understand the forces that had shaped her worldview. Margaret's letter inspired me to start a new project. I began working on a novel, weaving together the stories of women I had met, corresponded with, or simply imagined. It was a labor of love, and it consumed me in the best possible way. Every day I sat at my desk, pouring my heart into the characters and their journeys. The process was healing not just for me, but for the women I hoped the book would reach. Ethan was my biggest cheerleader. He read every chapter as I wrote it, offering thoughtful feedback and endless encouragement. "You're going to change lives with this," he told me one evening as we sat together in our little home office. "You already have." The novel took 2 years to complete, and when it was finally published, it received more attention than I had ever imagined. Reviews praised its raw honesty and emotional depth, and readers reached out to share how much the story had meant to them. It felt like the culmination of everything I had been through. A way to turn my pain into something meaningful, something that could help others. Amid all of this, Ethan proposed. It was a quiet moment, just the two of us at home on a rainy Sunday afternoon. He didn't get down on one knee or make a big production out of it. He simply took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small and intimate, held in a sunny clearing at a local park. Only our closest friends and family were there, and the day was filled with laughter, tears, and an overwhelming sense of joy. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about celebrating the love we had built, brick by brick, over the years. As we danced under the twinkling lights that evening, I thought about how far I had come. The woman who had crumbled in the wake of her husband's betrayal seemed like a stranger now. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, creating a life that was fuller and more authentic than I had ever imagined. And yet, I didn't regret my past. It had shaped me, taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. It had shown me the depths of my own resilience and the strength of my spirit. Without James and Linda, I wouldn't be the woman I was today. And for that I was grateful not to them but to myself for surviving and thriving in spite of them. Life continued as it always does. Ethan and I eventually bought a house, a cozy little place with a garden in the back where I could write, and he could tinker with his woodworking projects. We adopted a dog, a scrappy mutt named Rosie, who quickly became the center of our world. My writing flourished and I started mentoring other women who wanted to share their stories. Every now and then I still thought about James and Linda. I wondered if they ever thought about me, if they regretted the choices they had made. But those thoughts were fleeting, like wisps of smoke that disappeared as quickly as they came. My life was too full, too rich to dwell on the past. I had found peace, and that, more than anything, was the happy ending I had been searching for all along. The years slipped by like pages turning in a book, each one bringing new challenges, triumphs, and moments of quiet joy. Ethan and I settled into a life that was simple yet fulfilling. We weren't the kind of couple who needed grand gestures or constant excitement to feel connected. Our love was steady, like the soft glow of a candle that never flickered, even when the winds of life blew harder than expected. My career as a writer blossomed into something I could never have predicted. The novel I had poured my soul into became more than just a book. It became a movement. Readers from all walks of life reached out to tell me how it had inspired them to confront their own pain, leave toxic relationships, or simply find the courage to prioritize themselves for the first time. I started getting invitations to speak at conferences and workshops, where I met other women who shared their stories with me. Stories of heartbreak, resilience, and hope. One of the most surreal moments came when I was invited to deliver a TED Talk. Standing on that stage under the bright lights, I shared my journey with the world. I spoke about betrayal, about the ways we are conditioned to endure instead of confront, and about the power of choosing yourself even when it feels like the hardest choice in the world. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to thank me, to hug me, to tell me that my words had touched something deep inside them. Despite the busyness of my new life, Ethan and I made sure to keep our relationship at the center of everything. We never stopped prioritizing the small moments: a quiet breakfast on the porch, a lazy Sunday spent reading together, or an impromptu dance in the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove. Those moments were the glue that held us together, reminding us of why we had chosen each other in the first place. One spring morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, Ethan and I sat sipping coffee, talking about the future. It was one of those conversations that started casually and then spiraled into something much deeper. "Do you ever think about having kids?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. I paused, the question hanging in the air between us. It wasn't something we had talked about much, mostly because I hadn't been sure if I wanted children after everything I had been through. The idea of building a family had always seemed fraught with complications, tied up in the fears and insecurities left over from my past. But as I looked at Ethan, I realized that those fears didn't hold the same power they once had. "I do," I said finally, surprising even myself. I think I'd like to with you." Ethan's face lit up with a smile that made my heart feel like it was glowing from the inside out. "Me too," he said simply. It wasn't long before our wish became a reality. The journey to parenthood was as transformative as any other part of my life. Pregnancy was not without its challenges, but Ethan was by my side through every moment, from the sleepless nights to the excitement of feeling our baby kick for the first time. When our daughter Emma was born, it was as if a missing piece of my heart had been restored. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt a wave of love so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. Motherhood changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It gave me a new perspective on life, a deeper appreciation for the strength of women, and an even greater determination to protect and nurture Emma in a way I hadn't always been able to protect myself. I wanted her to grow up knowing her worth, understanding that love should never come at the expense of her dignity or happiness. As Emma grew, so did our family's love for one another. Rosie, our ever-loyal dog, became her constant companion, and Ethan turned the backyard into a wonderland of swings and treehouses. Watching the two of them together filled me with a quiet joy I couldn't put into words. Ethan was the kind of father I had always dreamed of for my children: kind, patient, and endlessly devoted. Through it all, my relationship with my past continued to evolve. There were moments when memories of James and Linda would resurface, often triggered by something small and unexpected. A certain song, a familiar scent, or even the sound of someone else's laugh. But those memories no longer held the power to hurt me. They were like faded photographs in an old album, significant, yes, but no longer defining. One day, while organizing old files, I came across the letter I had written to James years ago. The one where I had written, "I forgive you." I hadn't thought about it in ages, and as I read the words, I was struck by how far I had come since then. The forgiveness I had offered him back then had been tentative, almost fragile, but now it felt solid and unshakable. I no longer needed him to acknowledge my pain or validate my experience. I had done that for myself, and it was enough. As Emma grew older, I began to think about how to share my story with her. Not in its entirety, not yet, but in a way that would teach her the lessons I had learned without burdening her with my pain. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the fireflies, I told her, "You are worth everything, Emma. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." She looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Like you, Mommy?" I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "Yes, sweetheart. Like me." Life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was full. It was honest and real and filled with the kind of love that doesn't need to be questioned. And as I looked around at the life Ethan and I had built together, with Emma's laughter ringing out through the house and Rosie chasing after her, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. Peace, fulfillment, a family built on trust and love, and above all, the unshakable belief that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own blend of challenges and joys, but through it all, the foundation of my life remained solid. Ethan and I celebrated milestones: Emma's first day of school, our 10th wedding anniversary, the release of my second novel, and even the quiet victories like fixing up the leaky old house we had turned into a home. Each moment felt like a testament to the life we had built, one filled with love, trust, and a shared commitment to growth. Emma grew into a vibrant, curious child, with an insatiable appetite for stories. She loved hearing about our adventures before she was born, how her dad had once tried and failed to build a bookshelf from scratch, or how we had accidentally locked ourselves out of the house during a snowstorm. But as she got older, her questions became sharper, more focused. One evening while we were baking cookies together, she asked me, "Mom, what was your life like before Dad?" I paused, my hands hovering over the bowl of cookie dough. How much was I ready to tell her? How much could a child understand about heartbreak, betrayal, and the long road to healing? "It was different," I said carefully. "There were hard times, times when I wasn't happy, but those experiences taught me a lot about myself and helped me become the person I am today." Emma tilted her head, her brown curls falling over her shoulder. "What kind of hard times?" I knelt beside her, brushing flour off her cheek. "The kind that remind you how strong you are," I said softly, "but also the kind that show you what you deserve in life. That's how I knew I deserved someone like your dad." She nodded, her young mind processing my words in that uniquely earnest way children do. "I'm glad you found Dad," she said, smiling as she scooped dough onto the baking sheet. "I like him." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Me too, sweetheart." As Emma grew, I found more opportunities to share pieces of my story with her, always framing it in a way that emphasized resilience, self-worth, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. She soaked it all in, and I saw in her the seeds of a woman who would one day grow into someone strong, compassionate, and unafraid to stand up for herself. Meanwhile, my career continued to expand in ways I hadn't anticipated. My books had gained a loyal following, and I started getting offers to consult on film adaptations of my work. At first, the idea of seeing my stories brought to life on screen felt overwhelming, but Ethan encouraged me to embrace the opportunity. "Your words have already changed lives," he said. "Imagine what your stories could do if even more people got to experience them." The first adaptation was a whirlwind experience. I spent months working with the screenwriters, producers, and cast, ensuring that the heart of the story remained intact. On the day of the premiere, Ethan, Emma, and I walked the red carpet together, a surreal moment that felt like the culmination of so many years of hard work and healing. Watching the film unfold on the screen, I felt a strange mix of pride and humility. My story, once a private pain, had become something universal, something that resonated with countless others. But fame in any form comes with its complications. As my profile grew, so did the questions about my past. Interviewers wanted to know more about the inspiration behind my books, and while I had always been open about my experiences, I found myself navigating a delicate balance between sharing enough to be authentic and protecting the privacy of those involved, particularly James and Linda. One day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon an article with the headline, "Author's ex-husband breaks his silence." My stomach tightened as I clicked the link, unsure of what I would find. The article featured an interview with James, who had decided to share his side of the story after years of silence. He painted himself as a man who had made mistakes but had grown from them, framing his actions as the result of a complicated upbringing and misunderstandings in our marriage. I closed the article before I could finish reading it. I didn't need his perspective or his justifications. I had already made peace with the past, and I refused to let his narrative shake the foundation of the life I had built. But James's sudden reappearance in the public brought Linda back into my thoughts as well. She had remained a ghost in my life, absent but never entirely forgotten. Occasionally, I would hear about her through mutual acquaintances, how she was spending her days in retirement, doting on her grandchildren from James's second marriage. Part of me wondered if she ever thought about me, if she regretted the role she had played in my pain. But I never reached out, and neither did she. Then, one unexpected day, I received a letter. It was addressed in a familiar hand, one I hadn't seen in years. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a short, shaky note from Linda. "Dear Lily," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I've spent many sleepless nights thinking about the ways I hurt you, and I know no apology can undo the damage I caused. I was wrong about James, about what it means to be a wife, about everything. I see that now. I hope you've found the happiness you deserve." I sat with the letter for a long time, unsure how to feel. Her words seemed genuine, but they also felt too late, like trying to repair a bridge that had long since crumbled into the sea. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Her apology, while appreciated, wasn't something I had been waiting for. I had already made my peace, and that was enough. In the end, life is a series of choices. I chose to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I chose to love again, to trust again, to believe in the possibility of happiness despite everything I had endured. And I chose to let go of the pain, carrying only the lessons it had taught me. As I watched Emma grow into a confident, compassionate young woman, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She would never have to learn these lessons the hard way, because I had already paved the way for her. And as I held Ethan's hand, our family gathered around the table on a quiet Sunday evening, I realized that my story wasn't just about survival. It was about triumph, about finding joy in the aftermath of heartbreak and building a life so rich, so full, that the pain became nothing more than a footnote in a much larger narrative. And that, I knew, was the greatest victory of all. The seasons of my life continued to shift, each one marked by growth, change, and an ever-deepening appreciation for the family I had built. Emma blossomed into a teenager, her curiosity and confidence growing stronger with each passing year. She was the kind of girl who stood up for her friends, asked hard questions in class, and never hesitated to challenge the status quo. I saw so much of myself in her, both the woman I had become and the younger version of me who had once been too afraid to demand better. Ethan and I remained each other's anchors. As we grew older, our love didn't fade or stagnate. It matured, becoming quieter but no less passionate. We celebrated our successes together, weathered life's inevitable storms, and found comfort in the small, ordinary moments that made up our days. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and every time I looked at him, I felt a deep gratitude for the second chance at love that he had given me. My writing career took on a life of its own. After the success of my novels and essays, I ventured into new territories, including a memoir that chronicled my journey through heartbreak, healing, and rebuilding. I approached the project with a mix of excitement and trepidation, knowing that it would mean revisiting some of the most painful parts of my past. But as I wrote, I found that the process wasn't as daunting as I had feared. In fact, it felt like the final step in reclaiming my narrative. The memoir was a deeply personal project, one that required me to delve into memories I had long since tucked away. I wrote about James and Linda, about the lies and betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me. But I also wrote about the strength I had discovered within myself, the friends and family who had supported me, and the unexpected joys that had come from starting over. The book wasn't just a recounting of my life. It was a love letter to the woman I had become, a testament to resilience and the power of choosing yourself. When the memoir was published, it sparked a wave of conversation. Readers reached out to share their own stories of overcoming adversity, and the book quickly became a bestseller. It was even picked up for a documentary, which led to a whirlwind year of interviews, travel, and public speaking engagements. Through it all, Ethan and Emma were my biggest supporters, cheering me on every step of the way. One moment in particular stood out. I was invited to speak at a university, where I addressed a crowd of young women who were navigating the complexities of relationships, careers, and self-discovery. During the Q&A session, a student raised her hand and asked, "Do you ever think about the people who hurt you? Do you think they regret what they did?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was difficult to answer, but because I realized how little I thought about James and Linda anymore. Their presence in my life had dwindled to a faint shadow, a distant memory that no longer held any power over me. "I don't know if they regret it," I said honestly. "And to be truthful, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I moved forward. I didn't let their choices define me, and I didn't let their actions dictate my future." Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means choosing peace for yourself. And that's exactly what I did. The room erupted in applause, and as I looked out at the faces in the audience, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. My pain had been real, but so was my healing. Sharing my story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about empowering others to find their own strength, their own peace. Back at home, life continued to unfold in its quiet, beautiful way. Emma went off to college, pursuing a degree in social justice, a path that felt so fitting for her compassionate, fiery spirit. Ethan and I found ourselves navigating the bittersweet transition to an empty nest, rediscovering each other in the process. We took up new hobbies, gardening for me, woodworking for him, and spent more time traveling, exploring places we had always dreamed of visiting. One summer, we returned to the little seaside town where we had honeymooned. Walking along the beach, hand in hand, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. The years hadn't been perfect, but they had been ours, filled with love, laughter, and the kind of resilience that can only come from weathering life's storms together. As I watched the waves crash against the shore, I thought about how far I had come, from the young woman who had once cried herself to sleep over a man who didn't deserve her, to the woman I was now, strong, fulfilled, and deeply loved. The scars of my past were still there, but they had become part of the tapestry of my life, woven into something beautiful and whole. In the end, my story wasn't about James or Linda, or even the pain they had caused me. It was about the choices I had made in the aftermath, choices to heal, to grow, and to create a life filled with meaning and joy. It was about the people who had supported me, the love I had found with Ethan, and the family we had built together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I turned to Ethan and smiled. "I'm happy," I said simply. He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with the same love and devotion that had carried us through so many years. "So am I," he said. And as we stood there, the waves lapping at our feet, I knew that this quiet, ordinary moment was the culmination of everything I had ever hoped for. A life built on truth, love, and the unshakable belief that no matter what, it's never too late to begin again. As the years stretched into decades, the life Ethan and I had built together continued to grow richer, layered with the memories of a family that thrived on love, resilience, and unwavering support. Emma blossomed into a remarkable woman, her fiery spirit and compassion leading her to make a difference in the lives of others. She traveled the world for her work, advocating for those whose voices needed to be heard, and every time she came home, she filled our house with stories of her adventures and the people she had met. Ethan and I eventually retired, trading the fast pace of our working lives for the peaceful rhythms of our small-town home. The days were slower but no less meaningful. We spent our mornings sipping coffee on the porch, our afternoons tending to the garden or tinkering in the workshop, and our evenings reminiscing over old photographs and planning trips to visit Emma and her growing family. The scars of my past, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the years of questioning my own worth, had long since faded into the background. Every so often I would come across something, a photograph, an old journal entry, even a fleeting memory, and it would remind me of how far I had come. But those moments no longer hurt. Instead, they filled me with a quiet pride for the journey I had taken. In the twilight of our lives, Ethan and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, with a small gathering of friends and family. Emma, her husband, and our 2 grandchildren helped organize the celebration, filling our backyard with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked bread. As I looked around at the people who had come to celebrate with us, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the life I had now, but for every step, every stumble, and every triumph that had led me here. That evening, as the party wound down and the sky turned a deep indigo, Ethan and I sat together under the twinkling lights strung across the yard. The years had left their marks on us. Gray streaked his hair, and my hands bore the lines of time, but when I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had taught me what love truly meant. "Do you ever think about the past?" I asked him, my voice soft in the quiet of the night. Ethan turned to me, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only to remind myself how lucky I am now." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his love surround me. "Me too," I said. "Me too." As the stars twinkled above us, I thought about how my story had unfolded. It wasn't the story I had once imagined for myself, but it was better, richer, deeper, and filled with more love and meaning than I had ever thought possible. My life wasn't defined by the pain of my past or the people who had caused it. It was defined by the choices I had made in the face of that pain, the strength I had found within myself, and the love I had built with Ethan and our family. And as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the quiet hum of contentment, I knew my story was complete.